Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Tuesday, June 8th, and I'm breaking down this monster 15 game slate that we have over on DraftKings today, which is a big refresher from what we saw yesterday, where it was a 3-game all-day slate starting at 5 p.m., then a 2-game main slate starting at nearly 10 p.m. Eastern, so we'll just push that aside, and we are looking forward to tonight's slate. All 30 teams are available to us. We have plenty of aces on the mound, we have good mid-range pitchers, we have good cheap pitchers, we have plenty of stacks to talk about, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well, or you wouldn't be here if you weren't. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. If you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you're just brand new and you like what you see, just a nice and easy way to help me out. And if you don't follow me over on social media, you know where to find me in the handles in the bottom 10 corner of your screen. And if you want some extra content, I do have projections, my optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, Discord community, cheat sheets, and the entire player pool. I do update this throughout the day. So if you are interested in that, link is down below. I think there's a lot of useful information on the spreadsheet that should help you out each and every single day, get all the numbers that you could ever want. So like I said, if you're interested, you know where to find it. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the bats. And we have plenty of aces to talk about here. And I think a couple of guys that you could almost put as ace level status that are a bit too cheap here. So definitely a loaded pitching slate. And usually when we have really large slates, there's lots of value bats to make these guys work. If you want to double spend it for pitcher, usually these big slates are a good time to do that. And I have no problem with that at all today. There's no Coors Field, so it's not like there's going to be any super expensive bats that we're going to absolutely jam into our lineups. Yes, there's some teams that are expensive that are in good spots, but if you could use like a Bieber and Tyler Glasnow today, I'd feel really comfortable because those guys could easily get you 60 plus points combined. I wouldn't say they're in the best matchups in the world today, but I always give the advantage to elite pitching, which we know these are some of the best pitchers in baseball, especially two of the best in the AL. Obviously, Garrett Cole's there as well, but these guys have been absolutely phenomenal the past couple of seasons. They've been great this year so far, but we'll start up top with Shane Bieber, $10,300. Now, the thing is, these guys aren't overly expensive. Like, sometimes we'll see a pitcher over $11,000. Sometimes we'll see Jacob deGrom close to $12,000. That is not the case today. These pitchers are very softly priced. So, not saying you absolutely have to double spend up today, but it's definitely a viable way to go. Because I was playing around with roster construction a little bit, and you can make it work pretty easily if you do find the right value bets. And we'll start up top, though, like I said, with Shane Bieber, $10,300. 3.29 implied team total against him here in the road versus St. Louis, which is a team that I'm not really scared of. I've used pitchers against them before. Yes, they have a couple good bats in the lineup like Paul Goldschmidt, Tommy Edman, Nolan Arenado, but for the most part, righties can handle them well, and Shane Bieber, one of the best right-handed pitchers in baseball, and he's a pretty heavy favorite, 8K prop. Looking at his numbers this season, not quite as good as they were last year, but still pretty darn good. Nothing you're going to complain about. ERA is above 3, but the underlying numbers are a bit better than that. 2.67 xFIP, 2.9 SIERA, really healthy, 35.6% K rate, not really walking many guys. Kind of some identical numbers here to Tyler Glasnow. Like, they both have similar SIERAs, both have the same exact K rate. The walk rates are only 0.4% differences here. The K rates are pretty much the same. So these guys are both they're both going to be phenomenal plays here for the most part. Now, if I had to pick one, I feel like right now I might be leaning Tyler Glasnow just because he's a little bit cheaper and he's pitching at home in the Trop, which is obviously one of the best places to pitch, but you can make an argument for both here being the SP1 of the entire slate. And if you're looking at these splits here for the Cardinals versus right-handed pitching this season, not a team that's going to strike out quite a bit. Same goes for Tyler Glasnow's matchup versus Washington, but again, two elite level pitchers that can always get 10 plus Ks anytime they are on the mound. And okay, like I was mentioning though with St. Louis though, 23% K rate. They don't walk a ton, don't have a ton of power, but some okay numbers here. So if it was like a mediocre pitcher, I'm probably not trying to pick on the Cardinals, but when you have a guy like Shane Bieber, that's right around $10,000, which feels a bit underpriced, you can sign me up for that all day. Definitely should be pretty popular on this slate. Don't mind going there in cash games at all. And then Tyler Glasnow here, 10,000 bucks. He's pitching at home in the Trop, which, like I mentioned a little bit ago, is pretty much the best place to pitch for a pitcher. And less than a 3 implied team total against him here. Facing a Nationals lineup that's definitely got some decent bats in there. Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Kyle Schwarber, Josh Bell. I mean, it's not like a super easy lineup to navigate, but again, it's Tyler Glasnow, one of the best pitchers in baseball, so I'm definitely going to side with him. Very heavy favorite, 8.5K prop as well. And looking at his numbers on the season, pretty darn good. Like I kind of already said that they're very similar to Shane Bieber, but he's actually maybe been a bit better in some categories. And the matchup versus the Nationals is kind of similar to what Shane Bieber is. I mean, I feel like they're pretty much the same exact plays here, but since Tyler Glasnow is just a little bit cheaper and has a slightly lower implied team total, I guess I'll side with him, but you're kind of splitting hairs for the most part, but both are phenomenal plays tonight. And then if you want to get a little bit different, Walker Buehler should come in at lower ownership because he's just not quite as consistent as those two guys. Doesn't have quite the numbers or quite the strikeout rate, which when you're spending nearly $10,000 for a pitcher, you want guys that can get a ton of strikeouts. And well, Walker Buehler's not a low strikeout guy. He's definitely not like a Scherzer, Garrett Cole, Bieber, Tyler Glasnow kind of guy. He's sitting at 25.7%, which is, it's fine. There's nothing to really shame him for, but it's not what we're really looking for, nearly $10,000. What I'm mostly interested in with Walker Buehler today is that he's on the road in Pittsburgh, which is a pitcher-friendly park, and Pittsburgh's just not a very good lineup. Yes, I know they got a couple okay bats in there, like Adam Frazier and Brian Hayes, but overall, they just don't have much power in the lineup this season. They only have 116 ISO versus righties, 82 WRC plus. Again, not striking out too much, but if you're just looking for a guy that could probably get away with like 0-1 runs today and pick up the win, I think Walker Buehler is definitely one of those players. And if Tyler Glasnow is going to be super chalky and so is Shane Bieber, assuming Walker Buehler comes in a lower ownership, I think he's a very excellent tournament pivot off of those guys. Unless you're playing cash games, I really try to stick with either Shane Bieber or Tyler Glasnow if you are spending up, but Walker Buehler is definitely a good contrarian option there. Then dropping down to some mid-range pitchers, we have Sonny Gray and Alex Wood, who are both in pretty good matchups here, which is kind of the only thing we're kind of targeting here. Like, I'd much rather spend up for these pitchers today, but if you're just hunting for some strikeout upside, Sonny Gray and Alex Wood both find themselves in some pretty good spots. And we'll talk about Matthew Boyd, who looks like one of the best cheap options today because of that price point and the matchup that he has versus Seattle at home. But anyway, we'll start with Sonny Gray here. Only $8,400, which seems a bit cheap for him. I realize it's not a good park to pitch in Great American Small Park, so that's something you're going to have to keep in mind, which is always a bit scary because there are some lefties with power in that Milwaukee lineup, so it's definitely not going to be a cakewalk for him. But I definitely think there's some decent strikeout upside here because on the season, he's only pitched 42 innings, and he was injured for a little bit, so it's not the largest sample size, but does have around a 30% K rate. He will walk some guys, but he doesn't give up too much power. Only a 23.6% hard contact rate, and if we're looking at the splits this season for the Brewers versus righties, they are striking out quite a bit like they did last season, close to 27% K rate, only a 287 on base percentage, and a 78 WRC plus. Now again, them playing in Great American Small Park, it's definitely a boost for the bats, but I think Sonny Gray does have some decent strikeout upside here, and as long as he doesn't get hammered or give up many home runs, or if we just can get by with like 2 or 3 runs and have like 6, 7 plus strikeouts, that'll definitely be a decent day, $8,400. I think he's a really good tournament option. Alex Wood, $8,000. I believe that was the last game where he got hammered. I forget exactly who he was playing against. It might have been the Angels. I'm just guessing there, but I think it was a West Coast team. But either way, Alex Wood, besides that game, has been pretty solid so far this season. He's not a guy that typically goes like super deep into games or anything, but for the most part, he's been very good this season. His ERA, xFIP, and SIERA all kind of line up for the most part, so he's not getting unlucky. He's not really getting lucky. He's pitching of his numbers indicate he's pitching is pretty much as good as he has been pitching for the most part. 25% K rate, not really walking too many guys. He will give some power, close to a 200 ISO this season, but I like the ground balls. 56% ground ball rate, only a 25% hard contact rate. And I mean, Alex Wood versus Texas, not a team that I don't stack Texas much unless they're in Coors Field. That's when I usually have interest in them, or if they're playing just a bottom feeder pitcher. But I think Alex Wood definitely has the advantage in this matchup. They're not a team that profiles very well versus lefties. So far this season, they're walking at only 6%, which is one of the lowest in the entire league, striking out a near 25% clip, virtually zero power, 91 WRC plus, which isn't terrible. But for the most part, I think Alex Wood should be able to navigate his way through this lineup. I wish he was pitching in San Francisco, but still less than a 4 implied team total against him. He has a slight favor here, 5.5 K prop as well. I think Alex Wood should be just fine at that price point of $8,000 tonight. And if you need to load up on bats today and you want to use Matthew Boyd at $6,500, if you're searching for a cheap pitcher, I think he makes sense here in this matchup versus Seattle, which is one of the best teams to use lefties against outside of the team that he pitches for, Detroit. So unfortunately, he never gets to face Detroit. But Seattle this season versus lefties, they have been bad. 27.4% K rate, 165 ISO. The power's not terrible, but everything else is pretty low. Unfortunately for Matthew Boyd, they sent down Kalenic, who's been like a all-time bad stretch recently. I think it's like 26, 27 strikeouts and like 30, 40 some. It's been really bad for Kalenic. So unfortunately, that free strikeout is going to be gone out of that lineup for Matthew Boyd, but it's still a really good spot here, only $6,500. Now, I'm not trying to hype up Matthew Boyd as some elite level pitcher here to a great matchup. He has not been good this season, so it's going to be a battle of not good versus not good. But I think Matthew Boyd's not going to kill you at $6,500. I can't really see Seattle getting to him too much. I feel like he will have ownership because of this price point, so If you want to get really contrarian, you could stack against him, which could certainly work because we know Matthew Boyd's been anything but solid so far this season. But I just like the upside and I like the matchup. So if you're just purely hunting for good matchups here, Matthew Boyd makes sense. Now, his numbers would say probably not the best play in the world, considering he's got an xFIP close to 5, CRA close to 4.5, carry below 20%, and some other gross numbers with a near 45% fly ball rate. But he's not giving up too much power in the ISO department. That's below 100 and less than a homer per 9. So I think he could just, if he could give up like 2 or 3 runs and have like 5+ strikeouts, that'd be a good day at $6,500. So that's where Matthew Boyd would be viable. And if you think he can do that, which I think he can, I think he makes sense as a solid tournament play. Or if you want to get nuts, you could pair up with an expensive pitcher in cash games if you want to spend up for more bats, but I'm probably going to have a hard time doing that. I'm going to try my best to double spend it for a pitcher, but if I can't do that, guys like Sonny Gray, Alex Wood, Matthew Boyd do make sense just as a cheap SP2 today. But that's going to be it for the pitching, so we'll move on to the bats. It's a really good pitching slate. I could have talked about a few more pitchers if I wanted to, but I didn't want to talk about too many guys and bore you guys to death, so that's what we ended up with. But really loaded pitching slate for the most part, which usually when it's a loaded pitching slate, we don't have too many offenses to talk about, but there's definitely some beatable spots that I do have highlighted here. So we'll start with the catcher position. And as I always say, you could always just play whatever catcher you want. Typically, it's not a position you have to worry about too much. Like if you want to play Tom Murphy, I think he's $3,100 versus Matthew Boyd. You can do that. You can play Salvador Perez. You could play there's another expensive catcher I almost put on here, James McCann. I think he's like $5,100, which is insane. He's been playing well recently, but he's got a nice matchup versus Bruce Zimmerman, which we'll talk about a few Mets players today, but you can always play him as well. So just play whoever fits. But I do want to highlight a couple catchers here. So we have JT Rumuto, $4,700 versus Drew Smyly. I think the Phillies righties are one of the best plays in the entire slate today. You could even use some of the lefties like Bryce Harper. You don't have to leave him off full stacks, but if you're playing like single entries, 3 max, or cash games, I really like the righties here for the Phillies. They're not overly expensive, and I think they make for a decent stack. They have a team total of 4.7, which is one of the higher ones in the entire slate today. The team totals for the offenses aren't anything crazy. I think the Oakland A's have the highest currently. Now, I'm recording this the day before the slate, so that could change. It's like 12 a.m. the day before, or I guess the day of. So I think the A's are leading at 5.02. There's quite a few teams that are above 4.5, but there's not like a team that's got like a 6 or an upper 5 total right now. That could change, obviously, but 4.7 is not too bad compared to everybody else. We know JT Rumuto, one of the best hitting catchers in the entire league. Decent pop versus lefties. Some okay numbers. They haven't been great this year, but overall, he's a fine hitter versus lefties. It's a nice 44% hard contact rate as well. So eventually some of those numbers are going to start popping, but Drew Smyly's not a terrible pitcher. I have used him in some spots this season, but he's not very good versus righties. So far this season, 31 innings, 5.5 xFIP versus them, 17% K rate, close to the double-digit walk rate, and giving up a 45% fly ball rate with a 36% hard contact rate and close to 3 homers per 9. So the righties are grading out very well for me today, and JT Rumuto is one of my favorite catchers on the entire slate. Tucker Barnhart here, $3,400. I think the Reds lefties make a lot of sense here versus Adrian Hauser. It's a hitter-friendly park in Cincinnati, and Hauser's a guy that's very tough on the righties, carrying over to this season as well. So if you want to look at his splits versus lefties, he's got a 5 ERA, 4.1 xFIP, 15% K rate, giving up close to a 275 batting average, 200 ISO, and close to 2 homers per 9. But if we look exactly to righties, like specifically to righties, I should say, 25% K rate, still walking a lot of guys, but only a 200 batting average given up, close to a 70% ground ball rate, and only 1.3 homers per 9. So we definitely prefer the lefties here. The righties are a pretty strong fade candidate in this lineup, unless you think they can get to Hauser early on. But either way, I do like the Reds quite a bit, but specifically the lefties. And Tucker Barnhart, while he's not the best hitting catcher in the world, I like the park that he's in, and he's got some okay numbers for a catcher. So I think he's fine at $3,400. The Martin Maldonado, $2,700. The Astros are grading out as one of the best stacks, in my opinion, on this slate. They've always hit lefties well for the past couple of seasons, and while Martin Perez hasn't been terrible recently, he's actually been pretty solid for DFS purposes, looking at his recent game logs. I still don't think he's that great of a pitcher, and he's a guy that I've picked on in the past. I think these righties grade out very well versus Perez. You can see some of the lefties as well in full stacks, which I do have Yordan Alvarez listed down below. So I'm not full fading lefties, but the righties, which it is a righty heavy lineup, I think they make a lot of sense tonight. So Maldonado, if you're just looking for a cheap catcher, do his numbers suck? Yes, but he's $2,700 on one of the best stacks in the entire slate. Dropping out of first base, We have Pete Alonso, super duper expensive. These New York Mets bats tonight are very pricey. Like Alonso's close to 6K. Jonathan Villar's like 5,300 bucks. McCann's over $5,000, and Lindor's close to $5,000. This is not an easy team to stack. And the way they've been playing this season, you think they'd be a little bit cheaper, but it's like they're priced in Coors Field playing in Camden Yards in the summer, I guess, versus a lefty and Bruce Zimmerman, who's not the greatest pitcher out there, but massive price point. So if you are stacking the Mets, are probably going to have to use a cheaper pitcher today, but we do have plenty of options. But Alonso, he's got power versus lefties. It's smaller sample size this season, but I mean, he should be totally fine. He's got around 200 ISO this year. Bruce Zimmerman, while he has had a couple of decent games, not a good pitcher. And they get to the Orioles bullpen as well. A very, very hitter-friendly park, and you get the guaranteed ninth inning at bats as well on the road. So I do like the Mets, but I do not like their price points. Rhys Hoskins, 4,700 bucks. I can see him being pretty popular. He's been having a decent season, especially in the power department. Around a 240 ISO this season with over a 500 slugging, batting 270 as well. And like I already mentioned, I prefer the righties versus Drew Smiley. You can use Bryce Harper if you're doing a full stack, but I do like these righties versus Drew Smiley. Definitely think we can get a couple of dongers out of them. So 4,700 bucks, not a terrible price point on what's one of the better stacks, in my opinion, on this slate. Yuli Gurriel, 4,400 bucks. He's having a really good season so far, batting 310 with a near 400 WOBA, 210 ISO, 152 WRC plus, and close to a 400 OBP. $4,400 is not a bad price point as one. I like the righties here versus Martin Perez. And dropping at second base, same thing goes for Jose Altuve. He's been playing some strong baseball so far this season, batting close to 300. Not a ton of power, but obviously we don't expect that from Altuve unless it was a few years ago where he had that season where he was just having a absolute going absolutely off, just hitting homers, it seemed like every single day, and had like an absolute all-star season. I mean, it's nothing too surprising out of Jose Altuve, but obviously I think he grades out well here. Like all the Astros, pretty much the same thing as I said for Yuli Gurriel, just a little bit more expensive and in a different position. But they do have a team total close to 5 here, and I like batters in Fenway Park, and you get those guaranteed ninth inning at bats as well. Definitely a hitter-friendly park. Gene Segura, 4,000 bucks. We'll see where he hits. I could see him hitting anywhere from like 2 to 5 here, but he does hit lefties well, and he's been doing very good in the batting average department this season, batting 322. And if we look specifically to lefties, it's been pretty good. Only a 12% K rate, 180 ISO, 302 batting average with a 341 WRC plus. Pretty small sample size of only 66 plate appearances, but we know Segura is strong versus lefties. And Christian Arroyo, we'll see where he hits. I mean, I know we've seen Danny Santana leading off, but since he's a lefty on the mound and Framber Valdez, I think Arroyo should get the leadoff spot. Now, if he doesn't, I might change my mind here a little bit, but if he's leading off at 2,000 bucks, I mean, pretty hard fade. I mean, he's batting close to 300 this season with a 135 WRC plus. I'm not sure those numbers will keep up all year long, but 2,000 bucks in Fenway Park, Framber Valdez has some good games at times, and he actually just got done kind of killing this Boston lineup. I think he had like 30-some DraftKings points in that game, so I'm not like super in love with the Boston Red Sox here, but I do think the righties grade out well, and we're in Fenway, hitter-friendly park, and they do have a team total of 4.6. Not a full fade here from the Red Sox or anything, but specifically, if Arroyo is leading off, I do like him quite a bit here. And then Alex Bregman dropping out third base, 5,600 bucks. Like the lefties here, I like the righties here versus the lefty, Martin Perez. We know Bregman's been one of the better hitters in baseball versus lefties for quite a few seasons now, so I like Bregman if you got the money for him. Anthony Rendon, 4,400 bucks. He is the first Los Angeles Angel that we talked about. They just ended up having a really good game tonight versus whoever that pitcher was that Kansas City threw out. Is his first big league start. Did not end up going well. He got smashed in the first inning. So I like Rendon, 4,400 bucks. He's been picking up a little bit recently. I know the numbers overall this season have been pretty darn bad, but not a bad price point. They do have a team total close to 5. It's actually really close to the Astros, which is a little bit surprising because I don't think Bubich is terrible, but 4,400 bucks. Team total close to 5 here. Don't hate it if you just need a more of a mid-range third baseman. And then Alec Bohm, 3,000 bucks. Numbers have been awful this year, but I think we can play him at a pretty cheap price point versus lefty and Drew Smiley. I do like the Philadelphia Philly righties here quite a bit tonight. Dropping down a shortstop, Carlos Correa, 4,800 bucks. Again, like all the Astros righties here, and his numbers haven't been fantastic this season, but I wouldn't say they're bad. 275 batting average, 184 ISO, 133 WRC plus. I think he's fine at that price point. Unfortunately, it has came up recently. I think it was just a few games ago where he was close to like $4,000 even. Unfortunately, that's came up, but I do like all the Astros here. Frankie Lindor, 4,600 bucks. I realize he's been terrible this year, but you can pretty much use any Met you want versus Bruce Zimmerman. It's just a matter of being able to afford him, but Lindor is actually one of the cheaper options, which I realize he's been awful this year, so just be careful. I wouldn't say he's one of my favorite plays out there. I'd rather play Carlos Correa, but if you are stacking up the Mets, I think Frankie makes some sense. Then if you need a dirt cheap shortstop, I have not talked about one Oakland A's bat yet, but they have the highest implied team total here versus John Duplanter, who obviously is not a great pitcher. Now I just have concerns that they're playing in Oakland because it's definitely a pitcher friendly park. There's a downgrade for the bats here, but Elvis Andrus hasn't been awful in recent games, and he's dirt cheap at $2,100. And I wasn't seeing many plays I liked at shortstop. You could throw Xander Bogaerts in there as well, but if you just want a dirt cheap shortstop, $2,100 with a team that currently has the highest implied team total in the slate, Elvis Andrus is your guy. Never looks great playing Elvis Andrus, but he's your guy if you need a dirt cheap shortstop. Then dropping down to the outfield. Didn't like any of the super expensive outfielders, so I'm going to start here with Bryce Harper at $4,800. Now, I'll preface this by saying I would only play him in tournaments. This season versus lefties, that it has not gone well for him whatsoever. But in the past couple seasons, he actually has hit lefties very, very well. So I'm not overly concerned about the early bad numbers here for Bryce Harper versus lefties. I realize we're getting into June now, so I'm not sure how long I can still say it's early, but we still have plenty of months of baseball left. And I like all the Phillies, and if you are stacking the Phillies, I feel like a lot of people will just leave off Bryce Harper, so don't be afraid to leave off him, because obviously one of the best bats in that lineup. And then Jesse Winker, $4,600. He just got done recently putting up a 3-homer game, had 50 DraftKings points. Now, can we expect that every single day? Obviously not, but he's been one of the best hitters in baseball versus left-handed pitching, and one of the best batters overall for the most part. Like, he is absolutely crushing it this season. 348 batting average, ISO close to 300, 636 slugging, OPS above 1,000, and versus righties, he is absolutely killing them. Those numbers get even better with a 331 ISO, about a batting average close to 400 at this point, 205 WRC plus, and some video game numbers for the most part. And like we talked about with Tucker Barnhart, we prefer the lefties here versus Adrian Hauser, so Winker grades out very well at $4,600, and I could see people playing him just because of what he did recently if people are looking at game logs. Yordan Alvarez, $4,100, kind of what I talked about with Bryce Harper, where a lot of people are going to play the righties on the Astros, and they might skip Alvarez just because he's a lefty. But if you are playing in tournaments, if you're full stacking the Astros, don't be too afraid to play the lefty there. He should be perfectly fine, and he's shown the ability to hit lefties in the past. Justin Upton, $3,900. It's like he's turned back the clock this year. I don't know. He's been like actually pretty darn solid. I know the batting average sucks, but does have an ISO above 220 this season. Is striking out quite a bit, but getting a lot of fly balls. The hard contact's not terrible, and I don't know what it is, but Justin Upton's not been too bad. Should be leading off here, facing a lefty. Team total close to 5 here. Like him quite a bit, $3,900. Hunter Renfroe, $3,800. I haven't really talked about many Red Sox. I do have Arroyo on here, but you can play guys like Kike, JD Martinez, and all the righties for the most part. I think they're fine versus Valdez. They don't grade out super well for me, but Hunter Renfroe, the one thing he does well is have some decent power versus left-handed pitching, so I don't hate him. More of a contrarian option there, because I don't think a lot of people are going to be on Red Sox too much unless we see what their lineup is, and it could end up being pretty chalky, but we'll have to see. About Herrera, $3,600. He's recently been leading off for the Phillies. It used to be Andrew McCutchen, but he kind of got the bump down the order. Now, since there's a lefty on the mound, I guess it could be a little bit interesting to see what they do, but if he's still leading off, I do like all the Phillies here, so I wouldn't leave him off in tournaments. Tyler Naquin, $3,600. I like to call him the great value version of Jesse Winker. Well, he's been fine versus righties this year. He just hasn't been quite as good, but still some pretty strong numbers. Like if we pull up Naquin's splits versus righties this season, 246 ISO, 262 batting average, 500 slugging. It's striking out quite a bit, but a 46.6% hard contact rate. We're in Great American Small Park. I think Naquin's a really good tournament option. And then to end this video, we have Chas McCormick, $2,600. If you're just looking for a cheap righty with a little bit of pop versus lefties, I don't hate McCormick here. He's got a 215 ISO on the season, and if you're looking at splits versus lefties, it's not great. But again, we're just looking for cheap. A little bit of cheap pop here versus Martin Perez on one of my favorite stacks in the entire slate. Versus lefties, 167 ISO, but a 55% fly ball rate and close to a 40% hard contact rate. So if you're just full stack on the Astros, or if you just want a cheap part of that lineup, I think McCormick is fine for that. But with that being said, guys, that's going to be the end of the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. Go my spreadsheet, just hit the link in the description down below for the Patreon. Follow me over in social media if you want. I do cover other sports as well if you want to check those out. But that's pretty much going to be it. Hope you guys enjoy the full day of, the full slate of baseball. And I'll see you guys in the next one.